Next, we need to talk about the short essay on the relationship of the documents. That is set number 1. It comes immediately following the multiple choice section. You should skip over this and set number 2, short essay for that matter, to do the civic literacy essay first. Then work your way back to these 2 short essays. They will have less of an impact on your grade on the conversion chart that is used on the exam, and if you run short on time, they are intentionally short essays. So do the civic literacy essay before you do either of the short essays. But this brief tutorial is on how to approach the short essay set number 1 on the relationship of the documents. So if you look at the assignment page of short essay question set number 1 from the practice exam that I gave you, there are 2 bullet points that you must address: the historical context and the relationship between the events and or ideas found in the documents. There are 3 main types of relationships. You can choose between cause and effect, similarity difference, or turning point. Many topics can be approached different ways, and as long as you back up what you are saying and what you are writing about, you can't really be wrong. The only way you can be wrong is by using downright incorrect information. So how are you then going to plan out your thoughts quickly before writing the essay? Well, the easiest way to do that is a modified version of the 4-box method that we use to do a planning page for the civic literacy essay. Easy way, follow those 2 bullet points and have a paragraph about the historical context of the topic that you're discussing, what's going on at the time. Then your second paragraph will be on what is the relationship between the 2 documents. Now, what do you need to do, absolutely positively need to do, in order to successfully write this essay and at least get like a 3 out of 5, which is the most common score? 4 means you did a rock solid job. 5 is actually very, very difficult to achieve. So in the historical context section, you're going to give some background information, and if either of the documents are helpful, you're going to supplement this with document info. Very simple. This does not need to be very long. Remember, this is being referred to as a short essay in which they only want a couple of paragraphs from you. There's no need for a formal introduction or a conclusion, just a couple of brief body paragraphs. Then when you get into the relationship, I can't stress enough, I'm putting it in all caps. You need to specifically state the relationship and then explain why you were able to reach the conclusion that that was the relationship between the 2 documents. This is how you are going to write the set number 1 short essay on the relationship of the documents every single time. Doesn't matter what the documents are. You're going to give a historical context, background info with any supplemental information that helps go beyond your background info from the documents. Doesn't matter which one they come from. Then you're going to specifically state the relationship between the documents and explain that. Very simple. So let's use a specific example. Back to our assignment page, we have the need for historical context and a relationship. Your choices: cause and effect, similarity difference, or turning point. So now let's look at the documents we were provided on the practice exam I gave you. First document, remember the squid process in order to go through this properly. Source first. This is excerpted from Andrew Jackson's State of the Union address in December of 1829. This is less than a year into his presidency. He would have taken office in March of 1829. Let's go ahead and source the second document as well. This is transcribed excerpts from a tribal newspaper about the Cherokee Nation and white settlers in Georgia in March of 1829. Right around the time he's being inaugurated. So we know from our study of history that Andrew Jackson came into office and one of his big priorities was Indian removal. And since this is mentioning the Cherokee Nation, I'm thinking this is going to be about Indian removal. So if I go to my outline, I can quickly make a note that this is probably about Indian removal. I have yet to decide what the relationship between the two documents is. Now I can actually analyze each document, read through them, take any notes that are necessary. To start with, document 1, Andrew Jackson's State of the Union Address. Our conduct towards these people, which he means Native Americans, notice he's referring to them as these people. That's not exactly a respectful way to address a group of people. Our conduct toward Native Americans is deeply interesting to our national character. Their present condition, contrasted with what they once were, makes a most powerful appeal to our sympathies. Our ancestors found them in the uncontrolled possessors of these vast regions. By persuasion and force, they have been made to retire from river to river and from mountain to mountain, until some of the tribes have become extinct, and others have left but remnants to preserve for a while their once terrible names. Surrounded by the whites with their arts of civilization, which by destroying the resources of the savage doom him to weakness and decay. The fate of the Mohegan, the Narragansett, and the Delaware is fast overtaking the Choctaw, the Cherokee, and the Creek. Notice he's mentioning the Cherokee here, and that was part of the sourcing information in the second document. That this fate surely awaits them if they remain within the limits of the states does not admit of a doubt. Humanity and national honor demand that every effort should be made to avert so great a calamity. As a means of effecting this end, I suggest for your consideration the propriety of setting apart an ample district west of the Mississippi, and without the limits of any state or territory now formed, to be guaranteed to the Indian tribes as long as they shall occupy it, each tribe having a distinct control over the portion designated for its use. There they may be secured in the enjoyment of governments of their own choice, subject to no other control from the United States than such as may be necessary to preserve peace on the frontier and between the several tribes. There the benevolent may endeavor to teach them the arts of civilization, and by promoting union and harmony among them, to raise up an interesting commonwealth, destined to perpetuate the race and to attest the humanity and justice of this government. There's a lot to note here. Now, luckily, this is a short essay, so there's many different approaches, many different pieces of information here that you could use to your advantage. If this is about Indian removal and getting tribes to agree to Indian removal peacefully without the forced removal, without the Trail of Tears, which we know ended up happening, we can analyze some of this language here. Jackson is pointing out that some of the tribes have become extinct, that their resources have been destroyed. He specifically mentions the Cherokee, which we know is going to be mentioned again in the next document. He wants them to move west of the Mississippi, where there will be land guaranteed to them. They will have a government of their own choice, no control from the United States. However, this is the moment where he kind of foreshadows what is to come, because he then says, than such as, I'm going to use a different color to address this, than such as may be necessary to preserve the peace and between the several tribes. This is sneaky language. This is saying, essentially, if there's violence, the government can step in. And you know what? Be even more specific than that, the U.S. government, because he says up here they can have governments of their own choice. Now let's go and analyze the second document. This, make note of the fact, was before Jackson's State of the Union address. This was from right around the time he would have been taking office. To the Cherokee people, General Washington, after having smoked the pipe of peace with our chiefs, sent us word to discontinue the pursuit of vagrant habits and adopt those more substantial and become cultivators of the soil. His successors pursued, in regard to us, the same policy, and sent to us the same talk from time to time. That as game was precarious, which just means unreliable, and liable to destruction, The bosom of the earth afforded means of subsistence, both infinite and inexhaustible. The Indians were represented as incapable of learning the arts of civilized life, and at the same time treated in a most uncivil manner. They, still referencing the Native Americans, were savagely vengeful because they had the spirit to resent the murder of their friends and relations. They were rogues and thieves because, not knowing the method of legal processes to obtain justice, and if they did, their oath decreed to non-availing, they retaliated in the same way. They were drunkards because intoxicating liquors were introduced among them. In this way, our territory diminished, and our inheritance was circumscribed, which just means limited, to its present bounds. We have noticed the ancient ground of complaint founded on the ignorance of our ancestors and their fondness of the chase, and for the purposes of agriculture as having in possession too much land for their numbers. What is the language of objection at this time? The case is reversed, and we are now assaulted with menaces of expulsion because we have unexpectedly become civilized and because we have formed and organized a constitutional government. It remains for us, in this situation of the question, to act as free agents in choosing for ourselves to walk in the straightforward path of the impartial recommendations of Washington, Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe, as most congenial to our feelings and knowledge of the means calculated to promote our happiness. We hereby individually set our faces to the rising sun and turn our backs to its setting. That's very symbolic language. They will no longer continue to head west. They want to turn around and take a stand. So what I can gather from this, personally, is, again, some language that could be taken advantage of by people like Andrew Jackson. So this is a tribal newspaper about the Cherokee Nation and white settlers in Georgia. So it is being signed by a bunch of Cherokee leaders, and what they are doing is complaining about the encroachment of white settlers despite the fact that they had organized a constitutional government, that they had become civilized, meaning by the definition of the whites, they were now farming. They were actually doing what had been encouraged of them by Washington, Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe. So they are actually complaining about the encroachment. However, there is some language in here that could be taken advantage of and twisted, such as that they were savagely revengeful, that they were rogues and thieves, that they were drunkards. And forget the fact that there's more explanation to those things. Like, here's why we became savagely revengeful. Here's why we were considered rogues and thieves. Here's why we were considered drunkards. This, up here, is the language that's going to be seized upon by Jackson to justify removal. So if you ask me, you go back to your two documents, and again, this one came later, even though it's the first document, it came later, and I see a very easy cause and effect relationship to discuss here. So now go back, and your next paragraph will be about explaining the cause and effect relationship between the two documents. Now, the topic, again, generically, you need some background info, maybe some info from the documents. That is going to be your historical context. You can include outside information. You can include information from the documents. By 1829, the push west by white settlers is becoming much more aggressive. Now, you could include some factoids here, such as, if you remember, the invention of the cotton gin made cotton production much more profitable, but this also sparked the need for more land. So a lot of southern plantation owners remember that the Cherokee Nation that we were discussing was removed from the state of Georgia, where cotton would be very profitable. So the invention of the cotton gin led to a need for more land, and therefore, in the white settlers' view, a need for Indian removal. You can feel free to use specific information from the documents to help you along the way. In this case, going back to the document, I think that this sneaky language that Jackson was using in his State of the Union address is a nice transition sentence. Okay? Jackson used two-faced talk to justify removal. You can expand upon this in any which way you please. Then you need to address the relationship between the documents. Remember that March 4th, 1829, this article from a tribal newspaper came before Jackson's State of the Union address. So in order to describe this relationship between these two documents, you need to go to your second paragraph, specifically state the relationship. The relationship between these two docs. Notice I'm abbreviating using numbers to go a little faster in my planning stages. The relationship between these two documents is cause and effect. The Cherokee even identified problems within their own tribe, such as the drunkenness, etc. Now, a lot of this had been pushed upon them. Make note where that came from. This came from Doc 2. Make note before that Jackson's sneaky language came from Document 1. And because of this, even the Cherokees identifying their own problems, this is used to justify Indian removal. This is very brief, very quick, and it only needs to be a couple paragraphs. Your planning stages for this should be even faster than they are for the civic literacy essay, so that you can spend more time where it's going to be better placed, like the civic literacy essay. If you have any questions about this topic, come and see me in class. Otherwise, I hope you find this helpful.